It started with a siren that cut through the early dusk, the kind of sound that makes the air pause, as if even the wind knows to stay out of the way. On the side of Route 83, just past a faded Shell station, a sleek silver sedan pulled into the gravel, tires crunching with slow reluctance. The man behind the wheel didn't flinch, didn't reach, didn't run. He just turned the ignition off and folded his hands on the wheel. Malik Grant, 42, black calm, dressed in a light gray polo, slacks, no tie, just a watch, clean lines. A man who belonged anywhere, but often had to prove it. His eyes scanned the side mirror, noting the officer's stride. Heavy, aggressive, not rushed, but rehearsed. The patrolman approached with one hand hovering just a little too close to the holster. No greeting, no explanation. License and registration. Malik's tone didn't match the tension. Sure. May I reach into the glove box? The officer squinted. You trying to be funny? No, sir. A beat passed. The officer didn't nod, but Malik moved slowly, keeping his right hand visible as his left opened the compartment. 2 documents. No sudden moves. He handed them over. You own this car. I do. Where you headed? Just left a speaking engagement in Oakview. What kind of speaking engagement? A professional panel on crisis leadership. The officer smirked. You some kind of motivational speaker? Malik said nothing. The officer stepped back, glanced at the plates, radioed something in. His voice had a sharpness, like he wanted it to be overheard. Malik's hand stayed on the wheel. A second cruiser pulled up. 2 more officers stepped out. No sirens this time. Just lights and the look of assumption. The kind that comes with practiced routine. Step out of the vehicle. Malik hesitated. Can I ask why? Because I said so. People had begun to notice. A couple in a rusted Jeep slowed as they passed. A teenager on a bicycle pulled over to the sidewalk. Phone raised. Recording. Malik opened the door. Got out slowly. Stood tall. Eyes level. No raised voice. No sudden movements. The officer circled. You military? No. FBI? No. The officer chuckled. Just got that look. Like you're used to giving orders. Another pause. Malik's voice was steady. I'd like to know the basis for this stop. The officer leaned in. Too close. Suspicious behavior. Such as, you didn't pull over immediately. You hesitated. I pulled over in the safest possible location. Don't get smart with me. By now, the teen had walked closer. Still recording. Malik remained composed. I haven't raised my voice. I've complied with every request. That's when the officer reached for his cuffs. And that's when Malik spoke, just loud enough. My credentials are in the leather folder in the back seat. Top left corner. The officer froze. What credentials? Department of Homeland Security. Division Chief. The moment bent like heat on pavement. One of the second officers glanced at the primary. A murmur passed. The officer turned toward the car, cracked the door, reached. He saw it. The badge. The seal. The clearance designation. The posture shifted. Everything slowed. Malik didn't move. Didn't smirk. Didn't even blink. Another car arrived. Black. Tinted. Quiet. A woman stepped out, jacket open, earpiece in. Chief Grant, she said, voice crisp. We were tracking your signal. Are you all right? I'm not injured, Malik replied. The lead officer took a step back, eyes darting to the teen still recording. The crowd was growing, and silence had never been louder. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the edge of Malik's shirt as he stood by the roadside, hands relaxed at his sides, posture unshaken. He hadn't spoken since confirming his credentials. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence had already begun to tilt the moment. Officer Rowe, stocky, white mid-40s, with a buzz cut and a temper, had gone pale. The arrogance drained from his face, not suddenly, but in phases. First his jaw slackened, then his shoulders lost their puff. Now he stood beside the cruiser, still holding the folder he had pulled from Malik's back seat, as if unsure what to do with it now that the truth had surfaced. The crowd had grown to more than a dozen, quiet but present. A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform stood near the crosswalk with her arms folded. Two construction workers leaned against the hood of a work truck across the road, their phones out. The teen who had started recording hadn't stopped. Malik remained in place. Not defiant, not smug, just rooted. Like a man who had lived through these moments before and knew the cost of reacting too quickly. "Sir," Officer Rowe finally said, walking stiffly back toward him. He held the folder like an offering. This seems to check out." Malik took it back without a word, slid it beneath his arm like it weighed nothing. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Rowe added, voice flattening. But it wasn't really an apology. Not the kind that admits fault. More like the kind used to patch cracks and hope no one looks too closely. The woman who had arrived from the black vehicle moved beside Malik. Her eyes were sharp, but her body language spoke professionalism. "Agent Nina Bell, Internal Oversight Division," she said, directing the words at Rowe and the officers behind him. "You initiated a stop on a senior federal official. Were proper verification protocols followed?" The second officer, a younger man with uncertain eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "He didn't present ID right away. We had to ensure." "He was never asked," Nina interrupted. "You requested name and registration, not federal ID." Rowe's jaw clenched. "And you escalated to multiple units before confirming identity," she added, "which is against protocol when the subject is cooperative and non-threatening." Someone from the crowd murmured, "Tell it." Another said, "Still recording, just so y'all know." Malik turned slightly, enough to speak, but not enough to invite confrontation. I remained calm. I followed instructions. I stated my destination, explained my reason for travel, and asked permission before moving. Rowe didn't respond. "You called in backup," Malik continued, before asking the first relevant question. "That's not caution. That's bias." His tone hadn't changed. Still even. Still deliberate. But the words struck harder than any outburst could have. A local reporter had arrived now, small-framed woman with a camera hanging from her shoulder and a mic clipped to her phone. She wasn't filming yet, but she was watching. Listening. Rowe took a breath. "I made a judgment call." "Yes," Malik said. "You did." Nina's voice was sharper now. "This incident is being documented and escalated to federal review. Please prepare your body cam footage and written statements for submission." Rowe bristled. "You people don't." Nina raised a hand calmly. "Careful. The next words matter." For a long moment, no one moved. A breeze whispered through the trees behind the gas station, but otherwise the air was still. Rowe looked at Malik, and for the first time, something like realization flickered behind his eyes. Not regret. Not yet. But the awareness that he had misread the man before him completely, and had done so in full view of the public. "I'll file the report," he muttered. Nina nodded. "We'll be in touch." As the officers retreated toward their cruisers, Malik finally glanced toward the crowd. His eyes found the teenager, still holding the phone upright. The boy lowered it slightly and nodded, just once. A quiet gesture of solidarity. Malik returned it. Then he walked back to his car, slow, composed, each step a message. He opened the door, paused, and turned back to Nina. "Thanks for getting here fast." "We were already watching," she said. "Someone tripped the system when your ID scan wasn't verified immediately." Malik nodded. "That's good." But his face didn't relax. Not yet. Not until justice had a name. And now it had begun to. The parking lot emptied slowly, like a tide receding after storm. Cruiser doors slammed shut. Engines murmured to life. The officers didn't look back. They didn't wave. They just drove off, hoping the crowd's memory would fade faster than the story spreading across phones. But the cameras had already captured everything. Malik stayed parked by the roadside a minute longer, staring straight ahead, hands resting gently on the steering wheel. His reflection in the rearview mirror revealed nothing. No twitch of emotion, no flash of anger. Just the stillness of someone who had practiced control, so long it had become second nature. In the passenger seat, Agent Nina Bell tapped rapidly on her agency-issued tablet, her fingers moving with professional urgency. "They've uploaded the cruiser cam footage to the shared drive," she said. You can review it tonight if you want. I saw enough, Malik replied softly. Nina glanced over. You handled that like steel. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was without pride. You learn what not reacting might save you. Your job, your breath, your life. Her expression softened, but she didn't press him. A soft ping from her tablet interrupted the moment. She checked the alert and let out a breath. It's climbing. 3 separate videos are now live. One hit 20K views in under an hour. Hashtags already trending. Hashtag silent power. Hashtag stopped while black. Hashtag know his name. Malik closed his eyes briefly, not out of surprise, but out of inevitability. They'll come knocking soon, he murmured. Press, she asked. No, he opened his eyes again. Chain of command. 2 hours later, Malik stood in a secured video conference room inside the local DHS satellite office. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, no windows. He wore the same clothes, but the room made him look like a man under interrogation. At the far end of the table, a large monitor lit up with the stern face of Director Evelyn Hartman, head of regional operations. She didn't waste time. Division Chief Grant, she said crisply. We've reviewed the footage and received Nina Bell's incident report. Walk me through it. Your version. Malik stood, not because he was asked, but because posture mattered. I was returning from a panel in Oakview. I was stopped without probable cause, questioned without context, and subjected to escalating scrutiny after complying with every directive. My credentials were not acknowledged until after a second vehicle was dispatched and my identity had already been validated remotely by our office. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. The officer? Local. Sergeant Rowe. History of aggressive stops, based on what Nina's database pinged. And your behavior? Controlled. Deliberate. Cooperative. Evelyn nodded once, but the intensity in her stare didn't waver. This isn't your first experience with profiling, Chief. No, ma'am. It's just the first time the internet watched in real time. She leaned forward slightly on the screen. And do you intend to speak to that public attention? Malik met her gaze squarely. Not yet. If I say something now, it becomes about my voice. I'd rather they hear the silence first. Her expression cracked just slightly. Not a smile, but a flicker of approval. Smart. She paused, then continued, more measured. You're going to get asked to do interviews. Write op-eds, become a face. Maybe even testify. Are you ready for that? I'm ready to do my job, he said. Then do it. But understand, this is no longer just your job. This is a storm. How you move through it will say something about all of us. He nodded once. Evelyn's tone lowered. I'm putting you under limited duty review for 72 hours. Not because of misconduct, but because I know what comes next. Let the media spin. Let internal affairs dig. You stay grounded. We'll protect your authority. Yes, ma'am. The screen went black. Silence returned. But Malik didn't sit down right away. He stayed standing for another minute, eyes fixed on his reflection in the darkened monitor. Not out of vanity, out of necessity. Because every time this happened, every false stop, every unnecessary escalation, he had to check and make sure he was still in there. That dignity hadn't been worn down to dust. He eventually turned and walked out of the room. The hallway was quiet. Nina waited near the door. What did she say? Malik exhaled. They'll support me for now. She fell into step beside him. You know it's not over, right? I know. They walked in silence for a while. Finally, Nina spoke again, voice low. You're not just a headline, Malik, but you are the moment, whether you like it or not. He stopped walking, turned slightly toward her. I'm not interested in being a moment, he said. I'm interested in being a message. And with that, he walked ahead. Not faster, not louder, just forward. The following morning, Malik sat in the living room of his townhouse, blinds half closed against the rising sun. The news was already on, low volume, but the ticker along the bottom crawled with language that made him feel like an exhibit rather than a man. Federal official racially profiled by local officer. Incident caught on video. DHS confirms ID of Black Division Chief in traffic stop gone wrong. Community demands accountability. He muted the screen. The smell of brewed coffee filled the room. Across the small dining space, his 16-year-old son, Jalen, sat quietly with a bowl of cereal, foam glowing in his palm. He hadn't said much since coming home from his friend's house the night before. Only a glance at his father followed by a muttered, "Saw it already." Now, as the silence stretched between them, Jalen finally spoke. "You gonna be okay?" Malik nodded. "Yes. You look calm. But I saw the cop. He had his hand on the gun. The whole time." Malik turned to face him fully. "And what would have changed if I panicked?" Jalen didn't answer. He just stared down at his cereal. "You're angry," Malik said. Not as a question, but as a truth. "I'm tired," Jalen murmured. "It's always somebody. This time it was you." Malik walked over and sat down across from him. "Do you know why I stayed calm?" "Because you're trained." "No," he paused. "Because calm is the only thing they don't expect. And when people don't expect it, they don't know what to do with it." Jalen's jaw clenched. "Feels like we're the only ones who ever have to be calm. Everybody else gets to lose it." "I know." The boy looked up, his eyes sharp. "So what happens now? He loses his job." "Maybe. Maybe not." "Then what's the point?" Malik studied him for a long moment before answering. "The point is that now the world knows what it looks like when someone in uniform gets it wrong, and when the man they misjudged chooses not to fold." Jalen sat back, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't feel like enough." Malik's voice softened. "It never does. That's why we keep showing up anyway." The front doorbell rang, cutting through the moment. Malik stood, straightened his shirt. When he opened the door, two men in dark suits stood waiting, both DHS Internal Affairs. One had a notepad in hand. The other held a secure case. "Division Chief Grant," the taller one said. "We're here to initiate formal protocol for post-incident processing." Malik nodded and stepped aside. They didn't speak much as they entered, just nodded toward the kitchen where they could set up. Malik followed, expression steady. Behind him, Jalen lingered in the hallway, watching, listening. One of the agents, a black man with gray at his temples, caught sight of him and gave a small nod. Jalen returned it. Malik noticed, said nothing. The rest of the morning unfolded in quiet procedure. Timestamp statements, chain of custody forms, verifications, footage logs. The agents were respectful, thorough. But Malik felt the weight of every signature, like he was signing receipts for pain he didn't order. By noon, they were done. The lead agent paused before leaving. "If you choose to make a public statement, we recommend you wait 48 hours. Let the agency finalize its position." Malik nodded. "I'm not interested in statements. Not yet." The agent hesitated. "Your restraint, what you showed out there, it's not something we train for." Malik offered a faint smile. "It's not something you can." As they left, Jalen reappeared, this time without his phone. "You really not going to speak up?" "Oh, I will," Malik said, moving to the window. Outside, a small group had gathered again. Not a protest, just people. Curious. Watching. Waiting. "I'll speak," he added, voice calm. "But on my terms. And only once." "Why only once?" Malik turned to face him. "Because if you do it right, once is enough." Jalen looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, just once, the way Malik had done the day before. There was still hurt, still weight. But now there was understanding. And that, Malik knew, was how the tide started to shift. By noon the next day, Malik's name wasn't just trending. It had broken containment. News networks cycled footage from the traffic stop in the lower third of their screens, even while covering foreign elections and stock market fluctuations. Talk radio hosts debated proper conduct on both sides. Opinion writers began digging through Malik's public speeches, professional panels, and anything they could quote out of context. The internet had already made up its mind. But Malik, he just wanted time to breathe. Inside the downtown federal building in Glenwood, he moved like a ghost, acknowledged, but never disturbed. Most agents nodded when they passed him, but none lingered. A few looked away. A few looked too long. He entered the Situation Room on the 7th floor quietly, early for a closed-door strategy meeting with senior division leads. As he waited, he took a seat at the far end of the table, set his phone face down, and pressed his fingers together in front of him. The weight of the attention hadn't changed his posture, but it had changed the air around him. Minutes later, Assistant Director Shannon Marks entered with her usual clipped heels and precise energy. "Chief Grant," she said briskly, "glad you're here early. We're looping in comms and legal shortly." Malik nodded. "Status update. We've received 38 interview requests. 8 are national outlets. 1 congressional office is asking for a closed session hearing." "On what basis?" "Civil liberties oversight. They want to hear from the agent who stayed calm, not the agency." "You." He didn't react, just tapped his thumb once against the table. Shannon took a breath, softer this time. "Malik, this is getting large. Bigger than the badge. Bigger than the department." "Is that a problem?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's a responsibility." The screen behind them blinked to life, with video feeds from other field offices. A handful of upper-level brass appeared on the split screen, their voices crisp and rehearsed. Legal briefings followed, outlining DHS's protective stance. Communications flagged key messages and potential blowback. None of it rattled Malik, until they showed the second video, the one from inside the gas station. Unseen until now, it had captured more than the stop. It had caught Rowe, the officer, laughing into his radio before backup arrived. "Guy says he's homeland. I should pull out my taser just for fun." Malik leaned forward, jaw tight. For the first time, something in his eyes flared. Not rage. Not fear. Resolve. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Shannon looked grim. "Employee at the store sent it in anonymously. He said it didn't feel right keeping it to himself." The room fell silent. The weight shifted. "This changes everything," someone from legal said flatly. "Now it's not just poor judgment. It's premeditated disrespect. Possibly malice." Malik sat back in his chair. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, "I want the full internal file on Rowe. Every complaint. Every stop. Every time he made someone kneel without cause." Shannon hesitated. "We're already on it." "I want it tonight." She nodded. The screen dimmed, signaling the end of the call. Malik remained seated as the others began to gather their notes and exit the room. Before she left, Shannon paused beside him. "You still planning to speak publicly?" "Yes," he said. When I've read his file." That night, back in his home office, Malik flipped open the first page of the disciplinary file. Rowe had been on the force 15 years. 7 complaints. 2 internal reviews. 0 disciplinary action. 1 note stood out. A handwritten letter from a black high school teacher who had filed a complaint after Rowe allegedly shoved her face first onto her own car. The complaint was dismissed. Lack of body cam footage. No corroborating witness. But her final line lingered. "He didn't stop because I resisted. He stopped because I looked like someone he could humiliate without consequence." Malik closed the folder slowly. His reflection in the laptop screen met his gaze again. And for the first time since the stop, he allowed himself one deep breath of anger. Not the kind that screamed. The kind that built movements. The hallway outside the DHS Internal Affairs office smelled faintly of dust and printer toner. It was sterile, quiet. The kind of place where secrets were filed and forgotten. Malik sat alone on a bench outside room 417, fingers interlaced, elbows on his knees. Inside, a panel of 3 senior officials was reviewing the latest evidence, including the gas station footage. The second video had gone viral overnight, uploaded by the anonymous clerk. It had found its way to a whistleblower subreddit, then to Twitter, then to newsrooms. Its caption was simple. "He was calm." The cop laughed. The video was under 90 seconds, but it changed the trajectory of the conversation. What had once been seen as a tragic misunderstanding was now undeniable misconduct. And Malik's composure? It had become legend. People were no longer just talking about his restraint. They were questioning why it was ever required. He looked up as Nina approached. She didn't speak right away. She just handed him a printout of the morning's news ticker. Congresswoman Lenora Vann to DHS. We want to hear from Chief Grant. He exhaled. I'm not trying to be a symbol, he said. You don't get to choose that anymore, she replied softly. You already are. The door opened. One of the panel members, a silver-haired man with tired eyes, motioned for Malik to enter. The room was cool. 3 panelists. A recording device. A pitcher of water untouched at the center of the table. Malik sat upright, hands on his lap. Chief Grant, said the lead investigator, a woman named Daria Wolf. You're not under investigation. Let's make that clear. This is not disciplinary. I understand. We're conducting an internal audit of procedural failures, specifically why your credentials weren't verified immediately and why protocol wasn't followed despite visible DHS markers on your vehicle. Malik nodded. The problem wasn't the system. It was who decided not to use it. Daria leaned forward. Do you believe this was racially motivated? Yes. There was no pause. Because of how I look, I was presumed a suspect before I was given space to be a citizen. The second panelist scribbled something down. Daria continued. What do you believe the consequences should be for Officer Rowe? Malik didn't answer right away. He looked past her, past the room, past the walls, and back to the moment he'd knelt by his car. Coffee cooling in the gravel. Gun drawn. People watching. I don't want him fired to appease a headline, he said finally. I want his pattern exposed. I want every person who filed a complaint and got ignored to be seen. I want the silence broken. Daria's face didn't shift, but the third panelist, a man from compliance, murmured, That may take months. Malik met his gaze. So start today. Later that afternoon, he stood at the base of the community center steps on Claymore Street. Dozens had gathered. Not a rally. Not yet. Just people. Curious, hurt, tired. Some held signs. Some just held their breath. A podium had been set up. Local leaders had asked him to speak. And for once, he hadn't declined. He wore no suit. Just a black sweater, sleeves rolled to the elbow, like a man prepared to work. Nina stood off to the side, arms crossed, protective but proud. Malik stepped up. No notes. No teleprompter. No noise but the whir of a phone camera going live. He scanned the crowd once and began. I didn't come here to be a headline, he said. I came here because I was forced into one. A hush settled deeper. Some people still think this is about a traffic stop. It's not. It's about assumption. It's about the quiet decisions people make before they ever hear you speak. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve in the front row. A young man near the edge lowered his sign to listen. I stayed calm not because I wasn't afraid, but because if I moved too fast, I knew what might happen. That's the part people don't understand. He looked straight into the nearest camera lens. You shouldn't have to stay alive by making yourself smaller. He paused. I'm not calling for vengeance. I'm calling for accountability. And not just for me, but for every person who didn't have a badge when the gun came out. The silence that followed was electric. Not mournful. Not angry. Awake. Alive. Aware. Malik stepped back from the mic, and for the first time, he allowed the crowd to rise into applause. Not a roar. A build. A wave of affirmation, not for the badge, but for the truth. The phones kept rolling. And so did history. 3 days after the speech on Claymore Street, the department's inboxes overflowed. The clip of Malik standing at the podium, black sweater, no script, voice measured and sharp, had surpassed 5 million views. Not because it was loud, but because it cut through the noise. It wasn't just viral, it was visceral. And unlike most trending moments, this one wasn't fading. Every hour, someone new shared it with a caption that echoed the same truth. This is how you carry yourself when the world doubts your place in it. Inside the regional DHS office, the tension was shifting. It was no longer about whether Malik had been wronged. That was clear. Now it was about what the agency would do next. Director Evelyn Hartman paced in front of her office window. Sunlight spilled in across the carpet, but her focus was fixed on the open file on her desk. She looked up as Malik stepped into the room. You've been busy, she said. I spoke once, he replied, setting a copy of the Rowe file on the table. It's everything the department didn't say for years. She opened the folder. Complaint summaries, body cam gaps, timestamps from previous stops. Each one disturbingly familiar in its tone. You built this yourself. People sent me what they had. Teachers, veterans, grocery clerks, even a former deputy. Evelyn frowned. You understand, if we move on this publicly, we're not just condemning one officer. We're indicting a culture. That's what needs to happen, Malik said calmly. Accountability isn't about cleaning the surface. It's about digging out the rot. She nodded slowly. The Inspector General is requesting a task force. You'll lead it. He didn't flinch. I'll do it. There will be blowback. There already is. She looked at him for a long moment, then extended her hand. Welcome to the fire. That evening, Malik sat in his car outside the home of Karen Wilkes, the high school teacher whose complaint had been buried years ago. She'd agreed to speak to him in person, not as a witness, but as a woman who had learned to stop expecting justice. She opened the door herself. Late 50s, calm eyes, a scar along her left cheek that told more story than any folder could. I didn't think anyone would ever knock, she said. I didn't think I'd ever be the one knocking, he replied. Inside, her living room was lined with books, photographs, and quiet pride. No bitterness in sight, just resilience. I remember the look on his face, she said, sitting down across from him. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. Like hurting me was part of the job. Malik leaned forward slightly. Did you ever think about suing? I thought about surviving, she said. That took enough energy. He nodded. I'm leading a task force. I want your voice in the record. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Will it change anything? Maybe not for you. But maybe for the girl standing at the bus stop, who looks like you did that day. Karen exhaled. Then let's begin. By week's end, Malik had taken more than 40 statements. Quiet voices who had once been silenced, now stepping into light. Not because of cameras, not because of outrage, but because one man knelt on gravel, hands laced behind his head, and still spoke the truth without raising his voice. On Friday morning, an email pinged through the agency's encrypted network. Subject, Roe, recommended termination and federal review. Signed by Internal Affairs Oversight Committee. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. Malik read the header, closed the email, and folded his hands in his lap. Across the street, outside the window of his office, a group of young cadets from the local academy passed by. One of them, a tall girl with a shaved head and a badge still too new to scuff, paused and looked up at the building. Malik met her gaze through the glass. She lifted 2 fingers in a silent salute. He returned it, not with pride, but with a promise. That silence could be louder than sirens. That dignity wasn't passive, it was power. And that every ripple starts with someone who doesn't move, even when the world tells them to flinch. The building was quiet, but Malik could feel the movement in the air. It wasn't just the HVAC hum or the buzz of fluorescent lights. It was something different. An energy. A shift. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like isolation. It felt like clarity. He stood outside a room labeled Community Affairs Roundtable, closed session, a makeshift meeting hosted by local officials, attended by faith leaders, educators, and law enforcement brass. DHS had asked Malik to sit in, not as a figurehead, not as an officer, but as a presence, a reminder. He didn't want to perform. He wanted to listen. Inside, the room smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. People spoke in careful tones, the kind that tried to build bridges without admitting who had burned them in the first place. Malik sat in the second row, not at the table. That choice said more than words could. A city councilwoman, soft-voiced but sharp-eyed, was recounting a conversation she'd had with her 10-year-old nephew. How he now flinched every time a police car passed him on the street. He's not scared of crime, she said. He's scared of being mistaken. There was no rebuttal, only shifting chairs and lowered eyes. The chief of the Glenwood Police Department, an older white man named Wallace Briggs, leaned into the mic next. The video of what happened to Chief Grant had hit all of us. Harder than we expected. Why, someone asked. Briggs hesitated. Because we could see ourselves in Officer Rowe. And not in a good way. Malik lifted his head at that. Not because it surprised him, but because someone had finally said the part others avoided. There it was. The admission. A rustle moved through the room. The kind that follows honesty. Briggs continued. We train for danger, but we don't train for our own assumptions. That's the failure, not just of a department, but of culture. He glanced toward Malik. I'd like to extend a formal apology, not on behalf of Officer Rowe. He'll have his own reckoning, but on behalf of every one of us who ever saw control as safety and silence as compliance. Malik stood slowly, not to make a speech, just to make his presence known. I don't need an apology, he said. I need reform. Briggs nodded once. Then let's build that. The meeting ended with no applause, no photo ops, just exchanged glances and quiet exits. Malik stepped outside, into the crisp evening air, where the last traces of daylight smeared orange along the skyline. Nina was waiting for him near the sidewalk. How'd it go? Better than I expected, he said. Worse than it should have taken. They walked together for a moment, side by side in silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from avoidance. It was the kind that came when two people didn't need to fill the space to understand each other. You hear about the academy? Nina asked. No. They want you to guest lecture. Ethics module. Final week of training. Malik smiled faintly. They sure about that? They want to learn from the man who turned a gunpoint stop into a national turning point. He didn't respond immediately. Then, I'll do it. But I'm not going in there as a headline. I'm going in there as a mirror. Nina nodded. Sometimes that's exactly what people need. Back home, Malik sat again at his desk, notebook open. He wrote slowly now. Less like a man trying to draft a statement, and more like someone transcribing lessons for a generation yet to arrive. Strength isn't loud. Strength is what holds you up when the world is daring you to break down. Leadership isn't title. It's how you act when no one's clapping. And courage is what you do with your voice when it shakes, but you speak anyway. He closed the notebook. The words weren't for the public. They were for the next man pulled over, the next student asked to kneel, the next daughter who watches her father walk out the door and wonders if calm is enough to bring him back safe. As Malik turned off the lamp and stood from his desk, his phone buzzed once on the table. A message from an unknown number. I was Officer Rowe's first complaint. I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. Thank you. He read it twice, then turned off the phone, because the echo was growing. And now, the country wasn't just listening. It was hearing. The Glenwood Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy sat low and wide beneath an overcast sky. Its brick facade faded but proud. The words etched above its main entrance read, to serve, to lead, to uphold. Today, those words carried more weight. Inside the auditorium, 50 cadets sat in perfect rows. Uniforms crisp, notebooks open, attention poised. These were the future patrol officers, federal agents, field responders. Some looked confident, some looked tired, but all of them had seen the video. And today, they were about to meet the man in it. Malik entered without announcement. No badge displayed, no entourage, no script in hand. Just a black button-down shirt, slacks, and the posture of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to teach. He didn't step up to the lectern. He stood in front of it. Closer. Realer. I know what you've seen, he began. I know some of you probably watched the footage more than once. I'm not here to relive it. The room was still. No one shifted. No one whispered. I'm here to talk about what came before it, and what must come after. A hand went up in the third row. A young man with buzzed hair, somewhere between skepticism and sincerity. Sir, did you expect him to pull the gun on you? Malik paused. Then, I didn't expect anything. I prepared for everything. The cadet looked down. Malik continued. That's what no one teaches you in the manual. How to be calm when someone else is writing your story in real time, before you've said a word. Another hand went up. A woman, sharp eyes, steady voice. What would you have done differently if you weren't DHS? He nodded. Probably not survived. A ripple moved through the room. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And honesty doesn't ask for applause. Malik looked at each face slowly before continuing. The badge you wear one day, if you earn it, doesn't just represent authority. It represents assumption. People will trust you without knowing you. Others will fear you no matter how kind you speak. The question isn't whether that's fair. The question is what you'll do with that imbalance. He stepped closer now. No notes. No podium. You will be called into homes where people speak broken English and are terrified of uniforms. You'll stop teenagers who remind you of your cousin, or scare you because they don't. You'll meet men like me. Calm, clean, compliant, and some of you, he glanced around, will feel threatened anyway. A few cadets blinked harder than they intended. I'm not here to guilt you. I'm here to warn you. Power without clarity becomes danger. He let that line settle, then turned to the board behind him and wrote 3 words in all caps. See, here, wait, you're taught to act fast, he said, tapping the board. That saves lives. But sometimes, restraint saves more. He circled wait. You will never regret the extra second you take to read the truth on someone's face. You'll regret the one you didn't. The room was silent, not the kind of silence that waits for instruction, the kind that absorbs truth. A phone buzzed in someone's pocket. No one moved to answer it. Don't remember me because of that video, Malik said. Remember me because I'm proof that silence can be louder than shouts and more dangerous than threats. He turned toward the door, not waiting for applause, but a voice called out from the front row. Sir, he stopped. The cadet stood slowly. A tall young man with tired eyes and hands that didn't quite know where to rest. What happens if we do everything right and it still goes wrong? Malik looked at him, not just at his face, but through it, as if he saw every version of himself trying to make peace with that same question. Then you keep standing, he said, even if your knees shake, especially if they shake. The cadet nodded. Malik stepped out of the room. As he passed through the hallway, he caught his reflection in a glass panel beside the exit. The same walk, the same shoulders, but something deeper had changed. He wasn't just walking through halls anymore. He was leaving echoes. And echoes, when repeated enough, become movements. 6 weeks after the stop, the world had changed, but not in the ways people expected. Malik Grant sat in the green room of a national news studio in New York City. The lights hummed overhead, the silence loud in a way only power could make it. A producer passed him a bottle of water and whispered, "We're live in 3. He barely acknowledged her. His eyes were locked on the monitor, showing clips from the footage again. Officer Rose smirk, the second cruiser arriving, Malik standing calmly, like a statue of warning. They still playing that? He asked Nina, who stood behind him. They always will, she replied. That moment wasn't just yours anymore. It belongs to everyone who's ever sat in silence. He adjusted his collar, not out of vanity, but discipline, the only armor he'd ever trusted. Seconds later, the red light blinked on. Across the country, millions watched as Malik took a seat across from the anchor, one of the network's most celebrated journalists, known for grilling presidents and dissecting crises. But tonight, she looked almost reverent. Chief Grant, she began, you've been called the face of accountability, the conscience of modern law enforcement. You've sparked legislative hearings, viral movements, and now a federal task force. But after all that, what do you want most? Malik's reply was instant. I want to be obsolete. The anchor blinked. Excuse me. I want a world where someone like me doesn't have to go viral just to stay alive. The room froze for a breath. Then he leaned forward. This wasn't just about me. It was about a system designed to fear men who look like me. Until we put on a badge. And sometimes, not even then. He turned to the camera. If I hadn't had a federal ID, I might have been another hashtag. Another name on a list. My son would have watched my murder on his phone before anyone called him. The anchor softened. You've stayed remarkably composed through all of this. Why? Because I learned that silence isn't weakness. Silence is a choice. And when used right, it echoes louder than sirens. Backstage, Nina's phone buzzed. A new message. Leaked footage just dropped. Glenwood PD internal locker cam. Row destroying evidence. Timestamp matches Malik's incident night. She froze, then ran. Hours later, back at DHS regional headquarters, Malik stood inside a glass conference room with senior officials, federal attorneys, and tech specialists all watching a new video frame by frame. Rowe, red-faced, frantic, pulling a USB from his cruiser's dashcam hub and smashing it underfoot in the evidence locker, laughing as he muttered, "Won't need this once he gets the message." Malik's breath caught in his throat. Nina pressed pause. "You were never just a target of bias," she said. "You were a target of sabotage." A hush fell. Then someone from legal whispered, "This elevates the case to obstruction of justice, possibly felony misconduct." Another chimed in. "He wasn't just being reckless. He was trying to erase you." 2 days later, Rowe was arrested in his driveway. No headlines, no ceremony. His neighbors stood on porches as U.S. Marshals cuffed him. Some looked shocked. Others nodded grimly, like justice had finally found a pulse. Malik didn't attend. He was already onto something bigger. In a small auditorium in Baltimore, in front of a crowd of young cadets, Malik took the mic for what was meant to be a workshop, but became something else entirely. "I read every one of his reports," he said, holding up a folder. "You know what was missing? The names." He never remembered the names of the people he stopped. Just descriptions. Codes. Uncooperative male, approximately 6 feet 2 inches. Suspicious posture. You know what that means. Someone near the front raised a hand. It means he never saw them. Malik nodded. Exactly. And when you don't see someone, you stop caring what happens to them. He stepped down from the podium. This job will tempt you to dehumanize, to survive through detachment. But I promise you, every decision you make with a badge is writing someone's story. The question is, what kind of ending will you give them? The crowd stood in silence, not frozen, but transformed. 2 weeks later, Congress passed the Law Enforcement Verification and Accountability Act, LEVA. It created federal watchdogs for use of force incidents, mandated third-party reviews of body cam tampering, and funded racial bias audits across every major department. Malik testified in the final session, not as a victim, as a catalyst. He declined book deals, refused documentaries, but he did one thing no one expected. He took the chairmanship of the new Civilian Oversight Alliance. Because change, he knew, wasn't built by moments. It was built by presence. On the 1-year anniversary of the traffic stop, Malik stood in a park near Glenwood City Center, where a new mural had been painted. It didn't show the cruiser. It didn't show the gun. It showed Malik, standing calm, eyes forward, with the words beneath. You don't have to shout to be heard. At the unveiling, his son Jalen stood beside him. You proud? Malik asked. I'm aware, Jalen said, grinning. Proud comes later. Right now I'm just watching the world catch up. They laughed. And for the first time in months, it was real. And now, to you, yes, you watching this. If a man needs a badge just to prove he's worthy of dignity, then the problem was never about the man. It was about the system. So ask yourself, who do we only believe when it's already too late? Speak their names. Demand truth. Audit the silence. Then comment below and answer this. What would you do if the camera wasn't rolling? Because character isn't what we do when the world is watching. It's what we choose when no one is. Let's talk. Back